Yes, yes you are. We were hosting a birthday party and you just crushed our guest of honor. That's very rude. Steve focused on the person talking and saw a rather striking woman in set of practical-looking leather armor. No boob windows or anything. It was most certainly evil armor, however, considering it was black and was embossed with skulls in various places. The woman wearing it had short brown hair with a tiny bit of red tinge to it, but the most intense crystal blue eyes. Do you mind getting off of him? Steve looked down and realized there was a body under the doors he was standing on. Okay, he muttered, feeling a bit bashful suddenly as he stepped aside and then pushed the door off of the man beneath. The figure was in black armor, also embossed with skulls in various places. The apparent birthday boy was groaning in pain, however, as the impact from the doors had likely broken several bones. Fine, Larry, get up here and heal him. As Larry stepped forward to heal the wounded man, Steve saw another dwarf shoulder her way through the assembled guards in black armor. This one was a woman, though. Steve could tell because despite it usually being very difficult to determine a male from a female dwarf while fully clothed, this one was wearing armor that was designed in such a way as to accent her cleavage, which most male dwarves didn't do. Usually. Then again, the female dwarves didn't really do it much either, because dwarves didn't have much cleavage to display in the best of times. Could it be? Are you another cleric of the most beloved and delightful deity of all, the goddess of love? That got Larry to look up. Why sugarcoat my eyes and dip them in honey? You are, without a doubt, the finest of fine Larry Love has ever seen. Please tell me you're a second revivalist. Oh, I am, sugar child. Could it even be that you're a Great Caverns region disciple? She asked as she got closer. Goddess of love be praised, I am most sweetest of sweet. 5th reading council of 9 or 7th reading council of 8? Larry asked, stepping off of the poor wounded soldier he had no totally forgotten. 5th reading council of 9, she exclaimed with delight. Die, heretic! Larry cried out as he brought up his hammer to try and smash the other dwarf cleric's face in, only for her to pull out an axe and ward off his attack. Hey, hey, hey! Break it up! Break it up! Steve called out, as well as the woman in the leather armor as they separated the two dwarves. The hell, Larry? She's a heretic! Everyone knows the 5th reading council of 9 is corrupt! Larry exclaimed as he pointed at her around Steve. Says the sheep following the blind shepherds to his doom! She called back. We didn't come here to fight, Steve urged as he pushed Larry back. Isn't that exactly why we came here? Fenrina asked. Oh, I guess it is. Steve turned back to the woman and her own angry dwarf. Who are you anyway? Me? Do you not recognize the new rightful ruler of this land? The Duchess of Delight! She exclaimed proudly. And this is my darling division! She waved her hands at the assembled soldiers in black armor covered with skulls. Most of them had tankards of ale in their hands, or other bits of food, including plates with some sort of cake on them, but no weapons. And you're ruining this birthday party, she insisted. The fuck are you on about? I just came out of that stupid fucking bullshit you call a dungeon. He started and she blinked. Oh, you're the adventurers? How did you get so far? I wasn't prepared. What did you think of it? She asked then. What? Think of the dungeon? Who the fuck cares? What kind of shit is this? He cried out as he waved his hands around. None of this is how it should be. Well, you've just caught me unprepared. It's an early access dungeon run, you see. I thought you guys would turn back after a while. I didn't expect you to get so far. I'll have to rummage up an appropriate reward for getting that far. Maybe etch your name into a wall somewhere if you share your thoughts on the dungeon so far, she mentioned. But you really didn't need to barge in here like this. Steve stared at her for a moment before shouting out, What the fuck? What the fuck? An early access dungeon? Who the fuck? Why the shit? He made a few faces and then shook his head. No, none of this. I'm here to return this kingdom, duchy to... I'm here to fucking kill you and end your evil reign. I was only going through the dungeon because that's what the information said. Well, I'm really not ready for a final boss fight. It won't be anything like I imagined it, but I guess I do have to oblige. Though, do you really have to swear so much? It's so... crass. she said as Steve just stared at her in disbelief. All right, troops. This party will be cut short. I'm sorry about that. Someone get Jerry to a cleric. The rest of the cake will be handed out as soon as possible. And remember, tomorrow is still bring your kids to work day if you want to take up the offer. Get them excited in a future career working for the state. Steve backed up along with the other members of Doom as the soldiers filed past, and two of them dragged the unfortunate Jerry out from under the door to go get him healed up. After a few minutes, the room was empty of the soldiers, which just left Steve, Sherry, Larry, Fenrina, the Duchess of Delight, and the apparently heretical female dwarf cleric. So, 2 against 4? Steve asked. That's hardly fair. No, I'm waiting for my boyfriend and my own talking animal person to show up, she explained. They went to get more ice. Ice? Steve asked, just before a door to the side of the grand entrance hall opened up, and 2 new figures walked in. First was a very large black and white cat person, with a face crisscrossed in scars carrying a large bucket full of ice. Behind him was perhaps the most perfect man Steve had ever seen. He was gorgeous in the sort of way that could even make straight guys figure if they absolutely had to do another guy. Might as well be him. He was also not wearing a shirt, so he could show off a perfectly formed chest and abs, the likes of which Steve had only seen in theoretical drawings and old Cressian statues, since they value beauty over realism like Almarins. It took him a moment to notice the man had wings that were mostly white, but with speckled black tips. Hey, honey, my shirt got torn up again on accident, the perfect angelic man was saying. More like he ripped it on purpose somehow. What happened to the party? The cat person asked before Fenrina lunged forward with her tail wagging. Hi, want to be friends? The cat person gasped and hissed as he jerked back. Do you want an ice bucket? He cried out and dumped the ice bucket onto Fenrina's head. While several chunks of ice fell out and over her, most of it seemed to get compacted down as it sat on her head, covering most of it except her muzzle. Yes, thanks, this is great. I love ice, Fenrina said with complete honesty as she stood there with the ice bucket on her head. Well, I don't want to be friends, the cat person hissed out and backed away from Fenrina. Steve, meanwhile, was pointing at the angel. Your boyfriend is an angel? A fallen angel? He asked, noticing the lack of a halo. He sure is, and he is gorgeous, isn't he? Though the money I spend on getting him new shirts. The Duchess sighed at the end as the fallen angel smiled and shrugged. His name is David. And is your cat person a cat who protected someone they love? Steve asked. Not a chance. I don't love anyone as much as I love myself. But my old master enchanted me with magic to resurrect himself if he finally got slain by no good adventurers like you. He just got it a little wrong. People like you messed up the best gig I ever had. Food, warmth, small animals to torture. Ruined. The cat person shook his head slowly and glared at Steve. And his name? Steve asked the Duchess. That's Mr. Buttons, she answered. And your dwarf? He asked. This is... The woman started to reply but was cut off by the dwarf in question. Bessie, beauty darling, don't tell me you haven't heard tales of my great many suitors and adoring fans, all come to marvel at my sugar-sweet and milky smooth voice, honey child. The dwarf replied in a voice that truly did sound a bit like it was somehow wrapping his eardrums in silk. And who are you for? The Duchess asked in return. We are Doom. Steve struck his usual impressive so-y and waited for the thunder to fade and for the flickering lights to stop. But when he looked around at the others, he sighed. Oh, come on, guys, we fucking practiced this. Fenrina wasn't even looking the right way as she still had the bucket of ice on her head. Larry was glaring at Bessie, and Sherry was, Hey! Hey, over here! Steve snapped his fingers in front of her face to make her jump and stop staring at the angel. Huh? What? She asked in confusion as she looked around. I'm standing right here, you know. He huffed. Yes? And? She asked, still confused. You're staring at that angel! He gasped, as if that should have been obvious. How could I not? Look at him. It's like he was carved out of marble. He's got muscles I didn't know existed. That definition. She bit her lower lip then, as she eyed the shirtless angel once more. I think there's been some sort of mix-up, the Duchess said, interrupting them. I was supposed to get a good adventuring party. We are good, Steve shouted back. You've got a demon with you, she pointed out. Well, you're supposed to be fucking evil and you've got an angel on your side. Steve waved at the, for some reason, still shirtless angel. What about the werewolf? She asked. Were-husky. She was a husky who was protecting her owner from evil magic, and they got fused together, Steve explained. Oh, some sort of powerful sorceress? The Duchess asked. No, a girl from the far northern wastes, he shrugged. Girl as in teenager? The Duchess asked. Yeah, I think at this point, right? 13? He made a face as he realized he couldn't remember how old Astrid was. You've been bringing a child with you on dangerous adventures? The Duchess asked. It's a package deal. Fenrina is an adult. For huskies, Steve protested. Seems dangerous for a child. The Duchess clucked her tongue. Yeah, about that, Steve. Astrid did have some concerns, Fenrina started to say, looking the wrong way still with the bucket on her head. Not helping, he shouted, and then waved at the Duchess. And what about you being evil? You've got black and skulls on your armor, but you designed a dungeon that's surprisingly non-lethal. You were throwing a birthday party for one of your minions. They prefer the term henchman. Minion is just hurtful. The Duchess interrupted. Fucking... Steve growled for a moment at the correction before pressing on. You don't like swearing and you have a group of apparently close friends. Of course I do. Friendship is power, and we're all good friends. She hugged each of her friends in turn for a moment. Together we form the sinister, maliciously inspired, lovely evildoers, she shouted as they struck a pose. Smile? Steve asked. Yes, smiling is contagious, isn't it? Smile and the world smiles with you, the Duchess exclaimed happily with a big smile of her own that showed off her pearly whites. No, whatever. If you're evil, then what's with the lack of heads on spikes and lethal traps? And other evil shit, Steve asked. Hell, you even stocked that shit heap of a dungeon with monsters that regenerate so you don't need to endanger non-regenerative monsters. If you think that's all there is to being evil, you're clearly narrow-minded and short-sighted, she scoffed, which made Steve blink in surprise at the reversal of how these sorts of talks usually went. Capital punishment is most effective as a deterrent. There's no point in decorating the inside of my own palace with dead bodies. There are just a few well-placed crosses throughout my new nation. Crosses? Steve asked as he arches his brows in surprise. Oh, yes. See, there's this wonderfully evil nation called Almera that has devised possibly the most evil method of capital punishment there is, at least in terms of it being effective across a number of key areas. See, they nail someone's wrists and feet to a cross and leave them out in the sun to die of exhaustion and dehydration over a series of days. Once I overthrew the corrupt and decadent nobility across the nation in my popular uprising, I quickly established that as our method of execution. She proudly proclaimed. See, I told you it was evil, Fenrina said to Steve from under her ice bucket. It's fucking complicated, okay? Steve said with another wave of his hands. Now what were you saying about a popular uprising? The nobility here were extremely corrupt. They'd rape and steal and murder the peasants to their heart's content, including the rest of my family who dare stand up against them. Can you imagine being so threatened by mere farmers that you'd send in royal knights to slaughter an entire poor village? Well, the people had enough. No one else would suffer as I had. Steve felt a bit bad for the Duchess in that moment, so I brought them together and we rose up and slaughtered them in return. Every last member of their families have been crucified or slain in battle. Not a single drop of their blood remains to stain this land I now rule with an iron fist. She ended with a cackle of devious delight as Steve's sympathy began to fade. With our common enemy now defeated, the people had to be brought under heel quickly, so I made sure dissent was crushed swiftly. Man, woman, child, they would all be lifted upon a cross should they step out of line. Okay, see, you started strong, but I've lost you a bit, Steve said. You do know that the Almerans have a Senate, right? They vote on things, and don't really just crucify everyone, Steve pointed out. Because their people understand the unspoken rule of their military might. Here the rule needed to be written. in blood." She cackled out once more. "They shall all be united under my rule, and their hearts and minds shall be broken to my whims with time. Let the bones of dissidents be trode over by the iron boots of my armies, and turned into the very roads that I shall use to connect this great nation." "Okay, what about the dungeon?" Steve asked. "And the note about the treasure here. You said you were supposed to get a good adventuring group. Did you hire us?" The Duchess set her hands on her hips then as she began to explain. "Well, I knew that in time adventurers would hear about me deposing the noble family, so I was sure that unorganized adventurers would come sooner or later and be a thorn in my side. So I realized that they're really just looking for adventure. Hence the name. By creating a carefully planned dungeon, I could ensure maximum time spent to cost and drive off all but the strongest adventuring group who I could kill in a final climactic battle, and then either redistribute their gear back into the dungeon or sell off to recoup the cost of the dungeon itself." "And the difficulty of it at first?" Steve asked. "It's designed to be non-lethal, or at least low-lethal in the start, so that the less experienced ones would go back to the adventuring guild with their tails between their legs but alive, so that it wouldn't trigger a call for a more experienced group to clear it out and make it safe. I specifically requested a good group because they're not supposed to go past signs that say it's the end of the dungeon or ruin a birthday party by almost killing the birthday boy." "Do you not read the adventuring manual?" she asked. "I skimmed it," Steve said defensively. "And the treasure?" Some of the royal scum absconded with part of it during the uprising. The rest went into immediate investments in the military, infrastructure, and the dungeon itself. You were supposed to be a test group. I was working on filling in the rest of it through my national start-kicking campaign. The Duchess explained. "Through what?" Steve blinked in confusion. "It's my patented and effective tax collection campaign where my tax collectors go to collect taxes, as they do, and either you pay or they start kicking." She explained with yet another pearly white smile. "But how is it you got through that dungeon? It would likely have taken an extremely experienced group to deal with many of the challenges and a magic user to deactivate some of those magic traps I had set. But the fee to hire your group was so low that—" She paused and looked closer at Steve. "Wait, what's your name?" "Why?" Steve asked, feeling nervous. "That book. I just thought that was a toilet paper book at first." She wagged her finger at the spell book hanging from his belt. "You're Stephen Spellslinger! Oh my gosh!" She gasped and let out a rather girlish squeal. "I'm such a huge fan!" "You're... what?" He was now very confused once more. "Couldn't you tell I tried to model my look after yours?" As she said that, he looked over her armor and realized she had a harness set over it with various pouches much like his own, except she wore leather pants and not a skirt like he did. She approached him quickly then, and reached into a pouch as he defensively reached into his own to get ready to cast something. But then she just pulled out a small notebook and a small item he wasn't familiar with. It looked like she had encased the point of a quill in a bit of wood. "Can I have your autograph?" He hesitantly took the wooden quill and signed the notebook for her as she let out another girly squeal. "I get it now. I'm sure my efforts must seem childishly amateur to a professional like you. Oh, trying to explain crucifixion to an Almoran. Ha!" She laughed hard at that, and he laughed nervously, since he didn't really know what else to do. "I guess I just got unlucky when I picked your group. How could I underestimate a human when I'm talking to the third human mage ever, and the holder of the most awards and records of any Orbitus student?" "Oh, well, it's nothing really," Steve muttered, unsure how to behave now. "Right. Well, your secret is safe with me." She winked at him then, and he looked side to side in confusion. "What secret?" he finally asked. "Masquerading as a good adventuring group. Great cover. They'll never expect it, will they? I love the work you've been doing to destabilize the world and instigate conflict. Just masterful work," she gushed as Steve just blinked. "Okay, well, there's nothing else to do then. According to the rules of the adventuring manual, I surrender my title as ruler peacefully. I'll take my personal belongings and gather my soldiers and be on my way. Feel free to raid what's left of the treasury, of course. Who cares if the civilian government that takes over may need it? I won't tell if you won't, right? She laughed once more, and Steve just joined in more awkward laughter. Danny, are you sure he's evil like us? David the fallen angel asked. Oh, I'm sure of it. He calls his group Doom and hails from the most evil nation there is. I've told you all about him before. Besides, if he were good, would he swear so much and kill so many people? Not to mention what he did to fairies. Even if he wasn't, he's magic and I'm not, so we'd lose in a fight. So come on, everyone, let's get packing. With that, the Duchess of Delight and the sinister, maliciously inspired lovely evildoers turned to leave the grand entrance hall of the palace and pack up to leave. Just like that, Steve had ended the short yet bloody reign of Smile over the nation. Once they were alone in the hall, Steve just kept watching the door that the Duchess and friends had left through. Fenrina, to his side, looked around despite being unable to see anything still thanks to the bucket on her head. What just happened? I have no fucking idea, Steve confessed. While his first encounter with the Duchess would be the most confusing, it certainly wouldn't be the last time that Doom and Smile collided. But that's a story for another day.